Hi, this is Ruby Riley and Hannah Blyth, and we're here today with Atty Fitzgerald and Jessica Campbell, the producer and educational director of the play Mephisto, which is on at the Playhouse in 6th week. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the production?
It's based on a novel by Klaus Man, which is based on his own experiences running a revolutionary cabaret club in the 1920s and 30s. And the play basically just follows the story of the cabaret troupe and the actors and director of it.
And the novel, which was first published in 1936 by Klaus Man, is a very thinly veiled portrait of the actor Gustav Grudgens, who became a renowned theatre and movie director under the Nazi regime by integrating himself within it. Could you tell us a bit about this figure who seems to loom so largely over the novel and the play?
So Gustav Grudgens was briefly the brother-in-law of Klaus Man. Then he divorced Erika, Klaus's sister, and sort of increasingly became obsessed with his career and sort of the rise to fame that sort of mapped his time in the 30s. He starred in the film M, which is sort of quite famous, and then became sort of one of the leading actors during the Nazi regime. But originally he'd actually been a member of the Peppermill Revolutionary Cabaret and sort of had quite strong communist views, or sort of appeared to at least. And so it's sort of how he sold his soul really for his career, and that sort of comes across in the play. And he's sort of quite harshly portrayed.
You mentioned the Peppermill Theatre Company, which Man established. Could you tell us a bit more about the politically explicit content of their work?
They started off, the ideology of the club was to kind of promote communism through theatre. So it was, at first it was just sketches showing how life could work under the communist regime, and then as the Nazis grew to power it became much more about kind of taking the piss out of Hitler and exploring the darker side of the Nazis. But they were also pretty risque because it was all the social deviants of the age. It was Jewish actors and homosexual actors and black dancers all kind of coming together to try and make communism work in Germany.
Yeah, and you've got actually the black dancer comes about originally, actually Henrik or Gustav was a homosexual, but in the play Henrik is in fact, he has a relationship with a black dancer, sort of sadomasochistic relationship, so that makes it sort of even more risque than it would originally be.
And so you've got that kind of mixture of a really prominent part of world history and the kind of personal plot lines of the characters. Which one would you say was more dominant?
Ultimately it's not a play about history, it's a play about theatre, and it's set on the backstages of these cabaret clubs around Germany. So it's the characters who are the focus, but because all the characters are based on real people who are all part of this real Peppermill club, it's hard to separate the two into kind of politics and theatre, especially as at that time they were so intertwined.
With the publication of it in Germany being banned, after Grudgens' son took out a lawsuit against the publishers, how did this lawsuit progress?
The lawsuit progressed sort of, basically the son saw it as sort of defamatory and insulting to the memory of his father, Gustav Grudgens. Which, of course it was, but there was sort of a conflict between whether or not Man should be allowed to publish the book as a sort of freedom of expression, freedom of art, all of which had been so strongly repressed under the Nazi regime, and it was sort of important that those sort of important freedoms were preserved under the sort of the new order. So whilst one judge actually ruled saying that it should be allowed to be published, the book, another judge argued that the sort of character of Grudgens and also his memory was more important, and sort of the idea that something positive could come out of the Nazi regime, I suppose, as well. And ultimately, the book was prohibited and not allowed to be published until 1981.
And Man's own life became quite unbearable, and he eventually committed suicide, didn't he? And what caused this downward spiral in his life?
I think he was a manic depressive throughout his life, and I think after the kind of high of running this incredibly dangerous, incredibly risque cabaret troupe, life in exile was not nearly as exciting. It wasn't nearly as dramatic or as dangerous as it had been. He moved to America and wrote a bit in America. Then he was being chased by the McCarthy government for his homosexuality and his communism, so he had to flee back to Germany, and then he couldn't get Mephisto published in Germany, and the next year he committed suicide. So it's a pretty tragic story.
I suppose Berlin was very different when he returned. You know, it had been such a sort of sexually liberated place, and a really exciting place to live in during sort of the 20s and the 30s, and I mean sort of the early 30s obviously, and he returns and just, you know, different place, so sort of just country torn apart by war. Yeah.
And on a more personal note, the play follows quite a, like the turbulent changes within the theatre. Is it this kind of meta-theatrical aspect that drew you to the production?
Yeah, I think what's so great about the play is you have this incredibly, this extraordinary backdrop of this weird time in history that we're all kind of fascinated by. But within that you have the story of, set in theatres, on the backstages of theatres, which is something you hardly ever see represented on the stage itself. Talking about, you know, all the costume changes take place on stage. The whole thing is about a kind of performance, about the performance that the actors are going in their cabaret, and also the kind of airs they're putting on for each other, and all their lovers. So it's a great story.
Mephisto is being performed in 6th week at the Oxford Playhouse. Tickets available from the Playhouse website. Thank you.
Thank you.